All right. Got enough room in here? Let's see let's see if you are on screen, if I need to adjust the camera. No, that's good enough.
It's fine.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, the color's a little funky, but
Yeah, it was even worse. Okay, Matt, if you want to turn us live. Hey, welcome back to Stump the Stars Jewish Style. It's been a while since we've been together, but that has to do with the irregularity of the schedule. And speaking of irregularity of schedule, the schedule is apt to be a bit irregular coming through the summer. So please keep an eye out, both in your both in the newsletter as well as in emails as to when the next sessions are going to be. Oh, wait, it looks like we have got a doggy on screen. How cute.
hi, cute doggy.
All right. Anything from you to start with?
Anything from me to start with. So he bats the ball to me, who's sitting here going, okay, where are the Bibles and what are we talking about? Like I have a handle on this, but I don't. Okay, unlike certain weeks, I'm not going to identify which weeks.
No.
We have plenty of things to talk about. Some can be handled in a short way, and some can be handled more at length or need to be handled more at length. We have a couple of short choices here that we made to get our brains moving, get the ball rolling, whatever metaphors you would like to use there, to serve the ball, hopefully not into the net.
Yes, one would hope.
One would hope that.
Certainly hope so.
All right, which one of these do you want to do first?
It's on the top.
Okay, one of our intrepid followers. Do you know what intrepid means? They might think it's a dirty word.
No.
What did she call me? Okay. How do you interpret the idea of going to heaven after we die? It's immediately upon death, as when Yeshua told the man next to him on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Or as it says in 1 Thessalonians 4, we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. I'm hitting the ball back to the New Testament scholar.
Just a quick point of clarification on the interpretation. When it says we who are asleep, this has nothing to do, well, only tangentially to do with the parable of the virgins in Matthew, where some of them were sleeping instead of being awake and ready to go to.
That'd be a parable and not in real life.
Yes, and hence sleep has nothing to do with how many Z's you got last night. Having said that, by way of introduction, first of all, let me say that both texts, the Luke 23 text, today you will be with me in paradise, and the 1 Thessalonians 4 text, those who are alive and remain will by no means precede those who are asleep. Let me say, as paradoxical as it might sound, both are true.
Yeah.
All right, now, let me try to, as best from my perspective, unravel this for you. And the Luke 24 text has some other layers or ramifications in it that I'll try to briefly unwrap for you. So there they are, three on the execution stakes, Yeshua and the two beside him. And he says to the one who's expressed a clear affirmation of trust in him, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, where is paradise? There are all kinds of interesting interpretations of where paradise might be. Some consider it a place of waiting until the time where we're all, in one sense, graduated or ascended into heaven. Some associated with the place where Yeshua was for the 3 days and 3 nights before his resurrection, and some relate directly to to Yeshua being, to what we would often call heaven, or being in the presence of God. Just to start from the back end, just before Yeshua says the job's completed, that's what it is finished means, Yeshua says, Father, into your hands I commit myself. All right. Now, that in itself tells us that at his death, Yeshua went directly into the presence of God. Are you with us? At his death, if he turns himself over into God's hands, he is going directly into the presence of God. If that's the case, then where would the thief next to him be going as well? Today you will be with me into God's presence. So that does not give you, although a lot of people go this direction, any real foundation for saying that there is a place where Yeshua was for 3 days and 3 nights, and this thief was with him there. And then when he resurrected, those who were there in this similar place as well, this place of waiting, they also got, in one sense, resurrected into God's presence up until that point in time, that they were somehow in some sort of waiting state. Not to be confused with, boy, I had the term that went right out of my mind, the Catholic place.
Now that you mentioned that, I can't think of it either, but just go ahead, it'll come to me. They're probably yelling it at the
Yes.
screen.
Purgatory.
Thank you, purgatory.
Purgatory.
Okay.
Yes, it has nothing to do with purgatory.
Yeah.
It also has nothing to do with the text in, I believe it's 1 Peter 3, where it talks about Yeshua, through the Spirit of God, preaching the message to those from Noah's day, who are supposed to be in this waiting grounds as well.
This is very confusing to many, many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because of the Apostles' Creed.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you.
No, well, you're going to continue to
I will,
talk.
but repeat that part of the Apostles' Creed.
Oh,
as
see,
well as
once
you-
again, you're asking me to go into my memory with no context. He was on the cross, he died, he descended into hell. It says in the Apostles' Creed that Yeshua descended into hell. Okay, tell us why that did not occur.
Yeah. Well, we already laid the foundation for that, and that is because Yeshua told us where he would be when he died, and that's directly into God's presence, in God's hands, to use the metaphor. So you're either there or you're in this other place. And the reason for the creed saying he descended into hell, it relates to the text, like I said, in 1 Peter, where and I'm going to try to find it so we can read it exactly, where he went to preach to the spirits in prison.
Yes, so if you picture in church history, although I'm not an expert on this, but there are certain parts of Christianity, every Sunday, they recite the Apostles' Creed together. So really it's drummed into your brain. And that whole portion of the Apostles' Creed where he descended into hell then becomes part of the Bible to many, many people because they don't realize the actual thing that is being described by the Bible. Why the writers and the agreeers to the Apostles' Creed, early church history, and that would be, I believe, all represented Christians because there was no difference between Catholics and Protestants or Bible. They were all just Christians at this point in history. And they all agreed to it. And you had to agree to the Apostles' Creed to even enter, be involved with the church. So it might bother you that there's something not actually found in the Bible that you would have to repeat along with everybody else. But if you dislike creeds, you'll be happy with what we're saying. So, just pick your fight and go with the fight.
All
Did
right.
you find it?
Yep. Messiah died for sins once for all, righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. He was put to death in the body, but made alive by the Spirit, through whom he also went and preached to the spirits in prison, who disobeyed long ago, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah while the ark was being built, and so forth. And then there's another reference to this again in the beginning of chapter 4.
Okay, yeah,
Or no,
tell them where that is so they
Yes.
can find it for themselves.
1 Peter 3:16. No, pardon me, 18. 1 Peter 3:18 and following. And the way in which that's often interpreted is he went to the spirits in prison, wherever that prison might be, if it was some sort of waiting ground or whatever, which is often equated with paradise, the waiting ground. But the text, if you read it carefully, and how should I say, parse it out, really says, because apparently, and there's a reference in chapter 4 that reflects back on this. There was a question among those people to whom Peter is here writing. What about what about those who were alive before Yeshua, for example, back in the times of Noah?
Abraham, Noah.
Yeah, and whatever. They couldn't have heard Yeshua's message. And what the text is saying here is that these people heard the message that came through the Spirit of God, in effect, through the people of their time period. That's when this message was communicated, not during the so-called 3 days when Yeshua was in this place, whatever this place was. And then he dragged these people out of this prison to join him. Which is the way.
Let a whole train of prisoners
Yeah,
out of hell is the way it's usually portrayed.
that's correct. All right. It's conflating yet another text that I'll get to in a minute. Since I've forgotten about that, we'll need to deal with that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's Ephesians chapter.
That's why we need time to go over these questions before we get. But I think it's good for everybody to see. There are answers, and just because we can't put our finger on them right this second, we'll get to them. They'll
Okay,
be here.
well, anyhow, the other text is Ephesians 4, but let me finish with this. So this text is simply saying that don't worry about these people, worry about yourselves. God, through the Spirit of God, got the message out to these people through the various means that were around and available to them in their time period. Okay.
I have Ephesians 4 when you need it.
Yeah. Now let me see if there's anything. Okay, so we're still dealing with what Yeshua said just prior to his death. So where he went was into God's presence, and that means that the thief next to him also went there. It has nothing to do with the way in which this 1 Peter 3 text is, in fact, often used. Now, you've got that text in front of you, Ephesians 4. When he ascended on high, verse 8 of chapter 4, he led a host of captives and he gave gifts to people. All right, so that is often connected with this. After the 3 days and 3 nights, he then ascended and led out of this waiting place all those who were waiting for him to share the message with them to bring them out. There's another text that's also connected with this, and this is a parable. It's the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Lazarus not being the one whom Yeshua raised from the dead.
But another guy.
Guy
named Eleazar in Hebrew, because
Yeah.
Lazarus in Greek is Eleazar in Hebrew. Answering a question that nobody had.
Yeah. First of all, that is a parable, and so because it's a means of metaphor and illustration, you cannot plug all the details of that into, shall we call it, a real life situation. The point that is being made is not where these people are located or where this dude Eleazar went. The point is simply this: if these people did not believe what did they say? Moses and the prophets.
Mhm.
How would they believe someone who has been raised from the dead? And the point of that isn't that the rich man was in this place that he was looking up and there was an opportunity for him um, to cry out and ask this poor man Lazarus, go to my family, which is a very commendable thing, so they don't end up where I'm at. Um, it really is simply saying that, look, if they don't believe what's in the biblical text, there's no guarantee that somebody coming back from the dead will foster that belief any better. Now, two things to say. We have seen down through the ages, even with the historical evidence for the resurrection of Yeshua from the dead, and those who studied it, not all those who have studied it, have become followers of Yeshua. So there's no guarantee, Yeshua was saying, that a resurrection is going to produce the kind of results that might be expected from something miraculous. Okay? But let me also say, by way of the resurrection of the dead, and this is a whole other story that I'm not going to go any further into than simply saying this. When I was a university student rather, in a previous millennium, I heard a very renowned professor and scholar from the UK say the resurrection is the best documented fact of ancient history. And it is that. So I will say that the evidence for the resurrection is a powerful set of evidences that do indicate, one, Yeshua is the Messiah, and two, therefore, the message he has to bring is in fact accurate and reliable, and these events we read about are accurate and reliable historically. Okay, now, back to the main text, and that is, okay, so that deals with where Yeshua was after his death.
It does.
Yes,
So where was he for the 3 days if he's not in hell?
in the presence of God.
He's in the presence of God.
As he said just before he died, Father, in not to hell, not to paradise or some waiting
Not to
place.
Sheol,
Yes,
which
thank
is a whole nother discussion we could have about the Greek word paradise, which remember that the belief was you go to Sheol when you die and you await whatever's coming next. But a Sheol is often represented as a prison under the sea. So you're underneath the oceans in a waiting chamber, and you're not told too much about it. But it's that you're in this place until whatever happens is going to happen. I just thought I'd put that in there because I think you have to tie in Sheol.
Yes, thank
and
you.
how it might be different from paradise, because paradise is Greek. That's a Greek word. And if they're using it as an equivalent for Sheol, you need to know what Sheol is, but it's not Sheol.
Yeah, it's simply the place of place of the dead, or the grave. It's often
Or sleep, or the sleeping.
or the sleep.
Sleeping.
It's a synonym for the grave, for people being dead. So that's not where he goes. He says he goes directly into the presence of God. So he goes there, the thief goes there. If he went there and the thief went there, then where are all those who have believed in Yeshua? Well, they are in the presence of God. And in effect, in 2 Corinthians 5, the rabbi, Rav Shul, says as much when he talks about the fact that he would rather be clothed than unclothed. He's referencing his death. He says he'd rather be, he's confident in the fact that when he leaves this body, he is directly clothed or in the presence of God at that point in time. If you read that text very precisely and carefully. So there is not this unclothed or bodiless wandering around until we receive bodies that is often connected with this 1 Thessalonians 4 text. We who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. Okay. Once again, this tends to be expanded to seem to indicate that at that point when Yeshua comes, often in theological circles called the rapture. And that raises a whole question as to when and how and what. And the previous question from months ago asked a question about the rapture, which we haven't gotten around to. Anyhow, at that point in time, the dead are raised and we are transformed as Yeshua comes to receive those who are his followers. Okay. This is meant to be a word of encouragement to those about the people who are dead. And what he's saying is, look, when Yeshua comes, you don't have to worry about those who are dead. We won't get to be with Yeshua before they do. That does not mean that they aren't already with Yeshua. He's simply saying we won't precede them. Let me hold off before going there. It will be an instantaneous thing. Now that raises the question, when will that instantaneous thing be? Many years ago, had an interesting discussion with someone from the synagogue, and this particular person posited something quite accurately. And I'm going to try to explain this in a way that is clear. It is clear in my mind, but hopefully I'll get it clearly out on the table. Look, with God, there is no such thing as time. We live in time, God does not. Okay? So what happened, the psalmist puts it this way, a day with the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. God operates outside of space and time. That means that if we're operating outside of space and time, this event, whatever we call it, whether we call it the rapture, the return of Yeshua, or whatever, has non-space-time dimensions associated with it. And if you're outside of time, then your grandmother or great-grandfather or whatever, when that person, if they were a follower of Yeshua, died, they went instantaneously to be with God, in the presence of Yeshua, in the presence of God. When Yeshua returns, those who are alive will instantaneously be caught up to join him. But in God's space and time, because he's above space and time, all of those occur simultaneously. So for those who have in that sense preceded us, they've now stepped into a timeless dimension. And in that dimension, all things occur simultaneously. So even though it might have occurred 20 years, 100 years, 200 years, 1,000 years ago, when these events are brought together, it will be as if they occurred at the same time. So that too fits in one sense the description that you've got here, although it may take a while for you to wrap your mind about what I've just now tried to explain, which is tough to explain because
We're constrained
thank you.
by our dimensions,
Very well put, because we do live in space and time. We're constrained by our dimensions.
And it's only our imagination that can take us beyond our space and time
Yes,
limits.
exactly. So hopefully that has to some degree explained the interaction of these various texts, not just the two that were in this question, which are the two relevant ones, but some other ones that impact on it from all kinds of different directions. And I'm sure we've missed a text or two that occasionally floats in here.
Yes. Well, I would just say that we spent a little bit of time many years ago now with someone who believed in soul sleep. There are parts of Christianity that teach something called soul sleep. If you have never met any or know anything about it, well, this is extra credit for you. But for those who believe it, in other words, that the idea that when a person dies, that they go to sleep. I think it's probably an extension of Sheol.
to some degree.
I
think
mean,
so.
not on purpose, but
But
because they didn't realize. Whoever gave this doctrine did not realize. Um, they were instructed by the Lord, and so they didn't question these ideas. But what Yeshua says as he's dying eliminates that possibility. It says, today, not after you have a nice long nap, but today you're going to be with me in the Father's presence. And also, it also eliminates a very strong teaching from certain types of Christians that you must be baptized. It's not enough to pray the prayer or say the statement. You must be baptized or you can't enter heaven. And once again, the thief who's dying alongside Yeshua,
never got baptized.
yeah, there was no opportunity for that. So I think the more clearly we even know the events in the Bible and the activity around the actual events in the Bible, much less try then to make theology out of them. If we just read, it eliminates a lot of these questions that, yeah, it's not in there. If you can be confident enough and have read it enough, and you can scan your mind or go to a Bible and say, it's not in here. Therefore, I'm going to have a little problem signing on the dotted line to this idea, either that we sleep for a long time until we're gathered up, or that we have to be baptized or no go into heaven. You're going to have a problem arguing uh, with that, with the statements within the scripture.
As Patrice was talking, and I'd forgotten about that whole aspect that slides in here as well. It reminded me that if you read the texts carefully without some of the teaching or other stuff you may have heard that's associated with it, if you just read the text for what it says, it doesn't say as much as some people would like to make it say, but it does say clearly what it's all about. If we step outside of space and time, then the text can clearly say we all go through this at the same moment in space and time, regardless of what our time dimension was or our chronology was.
It really is to help us. Its effect is to help us feel better.
Yeah.
Well, what about, great Aunt Tilly, and what about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? There are other realms within Christianity that really put a question mark by, can we know that Abraham went to heaven? And they don't think we can know that he went to heaven. Believe it or not, they're very strict about their belief too. Because if there's no animal sacrifice, then there can be no trip to heaven, I assume, in there. But that point of view tends to divide every single thing into its own box. And then they throw shade on, as the kids would like to say, then they basically denigrate even Moses's experience, and we can't know if he's in heaven, and we can't know. So Yeshua is the answer because we can know with him. It undercuts great people of the Bible, and I think it doesn't trust God to reward people with the reward they deserve.
Yeah.
If that's a good way of putting it.
And the alternative to that is, oh yes, they are sure they're going to be with God, but they had to wait in paradise or Sheol or whatever term that is used until after Yeshua's resurrection, when all of a sudden then he transformed what was paradise or Sheol and transported it up to heaven. That's often the way that is then taught.
Yeah, it's like the explanation that the person comes up within their own mind. It's like that should have been in there, but it's not in there. So I'm including it for you. Yeah, you can't sort of do that. You could say you hope certain things, but you can't say that this is the way it works. Just because. So the Apostles' Creed would be one of those very important things in Christian history that I would say, yeah, I'm not signing that statement on the, although other things about that, the Apostles' Creed are just perfectly fine.
Okay,
Okay, now that we've beaten Bet to
okay.
death, we're on to something else.
All right, now those of you who are in front of us, whom we can actually on this monitor see and hear, do you have any questions on this before we leave this?
They need to think about it more.
If you do, you need to unmute yourself. So,
Okay. Can you hear me?
yes, we
Yes.
now can.
Okay. All right. So I guess I understand, about you're saying about the time and space thing. A day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day with the Lord. So I know I have to wrap my head around that.
Mhm.
But I guess, we're in the Thessalonians scripture where it says we don't precede those that are asleep. You're kind of saying that's kind of an interpretation thing that I don't know what the right way to say is maybe not quite as accurate as the Lord saying, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Or can I also say that those that are asleep, is it possible that those who didn't believe, is that when they're going to get the second chance to, will they get a second chance like those that are still alive who believe in Yeshua?
Good question.
I'm sorry, I'm probably taking a whole Bible course on here.
No, not really.
But a
Okay.
part of one.
A part of one. Yeah.
Okay.
The second chance.
Well, before we get into the second chance, let's deal with it in the context. Let's deal with the context of 1 Thessalonians 4:15. And I try to at least clear that up. Sticky pages. All right. All right. Friends, I'm going back to verse 13. We don't want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep or to grieve like the rest of humankind who have no hope. I love that. Now I'm thinking of it. Last night, the drosh was about hope. So here's reason for more hope. Right, so it's answering the question, what about those who are dead? And it uses the literary metaphor, have fallen asleep. And then it comes back and says, we believe that Yeshua died and rose again. So we believe that God will bring with Yeshua those who have fallen asleep in him. Okay, if he's going to bring with Yeshua those who fall asleep with him or in him, then the text is clearly saying these people who have died are where? They're with Yeshua. All right? According to the Lord's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. In other words, they are not hanging around in some sort of place waiting for us. And
Limbo, I think is the technical term.
Okay, limbo. Yes, limbo. And there are in some minor streams of Judaism some thought of a limbo as well, by the way. This isn't just Catholic purgatory or Christian Sheol or paradise or whatever else. The mainstream of Jewish thought doesn't go there, but there is some something within Judaism. Anyhow, they will we will not certainly precede those who have fallen asleep. Okay, so you see what the emphasis is. And so we've got to keep this thing in context and to read it carefully. And then it says, the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, the voice of the archangel, trumpet call of God, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. Okay, after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. All right. when the Bible speaks, and oh well. Yeah, we do spend some time on this kind of concept in a couple courses. Far more time in hermeneutics than we do in Jewish roots and foundations too, and I think even in the Gospels. And what I'm talking about is the difference between Semitic and Hellenistic thought, Near Eastern thought and Western thought.
Mhm.
Western thought, we're all part of the Western world, or parts, or wherever the Western worldview has impacted, tends to be very time oriented. Not so the biblical writers of the biblical lands in their times, they were not time oriented, but event oriented. So where this might seem like it's spelling out something in sort of a chronological order, I'm going to suggest it's not. It's simply talking about the on the ground reality. Okay? And I would say in the larger context, now that we've expanded, they don't go there before we do. We don't go before they do, because we're not talking about a chronology here. We're talking about the reality as to where these people are. And then once you add to that extra dimensional reality we talked about, in the sense of time, it doesn't matter at what time any of these people got connected with God, as Rav Shaul himself hoped or expected, not hoped, expected to be when he, uh, as he put it, left this body. He expected to have another body at the point of leaving this body. That too reinforces this. So, in other words, if we live outside, pardon me, if the ultimate reality is outside of space and time, we came into, for us, it's present, or our future. We come into the presence of God at exactly the same time that Abraham did, that Moses did, that David did, that Yeshua did in his resurrection and ascension, that Rav Shaul did. When it happened for them and when it happens for us is in God's reality the same point in time. All right. So hopefully that further clarifies the First Thessalonians 4 passage.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that Hebrew, the language, in fact, Semitic languages in general, so Semitic language would be not just Hebrew, but also Syriac and Arabic and any language that is, biblically speaking, from the descendants of Shem. Semitic, the word comes from Shem originally. So the Semitic languages in modern understanding are those related to Arabic and Hebrew and Syriac and those spoken by many, many millions of people in the world. And their tense system is different. So Western languages have a very specific tense system. In English, we have past, we have present, we have future, right?
Right.
In Hebrew, you don't have past, present, and future. You have past tense, and you have not past tense. Not past tense includes both present and future. Well, how do they know when they're talking whether something's going to happen in the future or if it's happening now? It's really not important to them. It's really not important. But that's how we understand other languages. But yeah, so you're just going to have to take my word for that. And I do know a little bit about this kind of thing.
Having taught Hebrew
Having
at
taught it.
university.
There is present tense in Hebrew. We have verbs, and I can teach you, or you can learn yourself, the verbs in their present tense, how to make a verb stem into a present tense verb. But really, it's a participle. So I'm not going to say anything more about that because your eyes will start twirling if we do all this out of context.
And it's Shabbat.
And it's Shabbat. There are distinctive endings for past in Hebrew. There are very distinctive endings for future in Hebrew. It's the current moment. Because if you really stop to think about it, once you say the word now, it's already gone, right?
Mhm.
So I would say that maybe Western languages are really sort of inaccurate because in time, within time. The minute you say the word now, it's gone, it's now past. So, yeah, this thing about narrowing down on time is problematic for people, because although it has been proven to be its own dimension, time is its own dimension. And because the only difference between, I can be in the same time, I can be in the same place that I was yesterday. I can sit in this chair like I did yesterday. But time-wise, it's two different sittings. So, have I confused everyone
No,
now?
But a set of terms occurred to me when you were describing the Hebrew verb system.
Okay.
Maybe rather than past, think of it as complete.
Complete or
Any-
incomplete, that's what we call it.
Yeah, complete and incomplete.
Yeah.
And that'll help.
That will help. In Greek and Latin, I believe, although I never took Latin, you add endings onto the stem of the root of the word to indicate what time period you're talking about. Like, is it future? Is it past? In Greek, you can say something happened in the past and continues happening until now. It's still happening. That's one verb tense. You have a simple, it happened in the past and it was done in the past. And we see this more in English in the future. We can mark things in time in future tense if we add more words. We don't add endings, we add words. So I'll give you a very nice sentence that you might have said. By the time the airplane lands, that's in the future. By the time the airplane will have landed, we will already have arrived in the car. So now I've just pinpointed now the car arrives, the airplane lands. But I had to do it with extra words, not with single words with lots of endings.
And just so you're aware, Latin and Greek and English have not 3 tenses, but technically 6 tenses.
That's not Hebrew, that would be.
That's not Hebrew. So just to confuse things a little bit, yeah.
See, Western language is complicated,
Complicated, yeah.
very complicated. Hebrew, not as complicated. It's a simple language. It's not complicated. English is one of the most complicated languages ever. Unfortunately, that's why it's hard.
All right, now, we did not get to the other thing that Celia mentioned, and that is second chance.
Oh, yeah.
I
I haven't thought about this in a long time.
Long time, no, nor have I. Let me suggest that the way God works is regular, repeated chances for all people, regardless of their circumstance. So I know what's being referred to, because this is in some circles a common term or common understanding of relationship with God, that you get a second chance either at death or somehow right after death to grasp and enter the reality of relationship with God. My understanding is that God works in people's lives according to their circumstances in such a way that they have an opportunity to understand who He is and respond to Him based on what they know. And what they know, what is required of them to know, varies in time and space. Sorry to get back into that whole business again, depending on their circumstances. So what Abraham, what Moses, what David, what the prophets of old knew and had to know with respect to having a more intimate relationship with God, that varied from time to time and from place to place. But we know from a number of circumstances, and in fact, since I mentioned Abraham's haggling with God over Sodom and Gomorrah is just one indication of this, that God will make sure that the people who are involved get as much that those who are responding correctly to the information that they do have access to, God will get sufficient further information to bring them home, so to speak. And rather than Abraham, much better is the story of Rahab. Rahab and those with her saw what God had done. And one of the things they mentioned that God has done is very timely. It's in the Parsha from this weekend. And that is what God had done to Sihon and Og. And because they had seen what he had done to them and had heard about the Exodus, those people were afraid and knew the reality and the power of this God. So what did God do for Rahab? He made sure that the two spies ended up in her house so that she could get the rest of the information, and then she too became part of the ongoing reality of God working among his people, and she eventually became part of the community of Israel.
And I want to point out, especially about Rahab, but I think it's a very good example. So God presented her with the knowledge in the people, in the person of these two guys. I don't know how to say that correctly.
Yeah,
He brought these two guys in and gave her the information. It isn't just in her heart. She believed something with all her might. No, she did stuff. She did stuff that was beneficial and that made a difference. She did basically everything she could on her own to make sure that their plan would succeed. And she says, I believe in the God that you believe in. And she acted on it. It wasn't just, I prayed a prayer in my heart.
Mhm.
See, this is the difference nowadays. It went from, we're going to go out. Now that we believe something, we're going to go out and do things that we know he wants us to do. Not in a crazy, wacky, out of control way, but in a very well-planned, smart, showing people how we do believe it because we're acting on it. We're not just sitting and praying to God about it. See, that is a difference that I think our culture needs to see. We talk with our mouths, but then we don't do. We have to also do. And I'm preaching that to myself as much as anybody else.
Another similar example to this is Cornelius in the book of Acts. He had followed God to the best of his knowledge, and to the best of his knowledge, and for this, Patrice could spend a whole lot of time on it, enabled him to become what we would call a God-fearer, or what was called a God-fearer. These are non-Jews who had realized the reality and relevance of Judaism, so much so that they attached themselves to Judaism and adopted a Jewish life. They did not become converts or become Jews, but as non-Jews, they lived a Jewish life. But by the time of the book of Acts, there was something else that needed to be filled in by way of detail. So what happens? While he's praying on a housetop, the Spirit of God interjects into Peter's prayer life a vision. And similarly, at Cornelius' location, Spirit of God moves Cornelius to send messengers to search this person, Peter, out. So he used rather supernatural, or what we would consider supernatural kinds of situations to bring Peter together with Cornelius so Cornelius could get the rest of the message. And that happens repeatedly through the book of Acts. And I'm going to suggest that happens repeatedly through all of history. God will make sure to get the information out to the people who are responding properly to him, whether it's in the Amazon, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in America. He will get the information people who respond properly to him need in order to take that step of entering into that intimacy of relationship with him.
That's in Acts 10, by the way, if you want to look up the story of Cornelius. Most people don't read about him. Here's what they care about. oh, Peter has a vision. Is what they just skip all the part about who needs Cornelius, who cares about him, and they want the vision where God spreads out a sheet, and he says, Peter, okay, get up and kill all these things and enjoy a lovely visit to Red Lobster. And that's not what the vision is saying whatsoever. It has nothing whatsoever to do with what Peter eats. We can assume Peter never ate any of those unclean animals, and he would tell us not to eat them along with him. I'm just pointing that out because the part you skipped over to get to the vision that is misconstrued anyway is the part about Cornelius. Cornelius, like Rahab, it's interesting. You could compare and contrast the two stories, and that would be a good master's thesis for somebody who wanted to do that. These are outside people who are affected by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is normally outside their realm, totally outside of their belief system, not even close to what the people in their culture believed. And yet they turned to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then how do we see them? Did God approve of what they were doing? Or did he grudgingly say, well, I suppose, since you got the question right, I have to let you in, but I don't trust. Is that? No. As a matter of fact, their lives are exemplary followers of what God has led them to in their belief system that causes them both to act in what their culture would have thought was outrageous ways. Remember, Jericho, not godly, the most ungodly place you can imagine, except for, and I'll just say this, except for where Cornelius was living. Cornelius lived in Caesarea, a Roman city, the main city in the whole province, the Roman province of Judea, the place where the Roman overlords lived. And he reached out to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we should all thank Cornelius for his faithfulness and for what he was teaching his family. It involved his family first before it ever involved Shimon Peter. So that's a different take than you usually get about Cornelius, but more could be said, but that'd be a whole talk in and of itself.
And well worth the talk. I was looking at this just 2 days ago. Newsletter from some friends of ours who work with an organization called Crew. Keith and Kim, how long have we known them?
Oh, a long time.
Long time.
A long time.
Yes.
From a past century.
Yes, a past century, a previous millennium, in fact. They have a unique work within that organization called Crew. And one of the things that they are associated with is the spreading of a film called the Jesus Film through various kinds of venues or media platforms. In parts of the world, non-Western parts of the world, and particularly in parts of the world, as I recall it, that are mainly Islamic. And this is something that they've shared with on more than one occasion that happens with some regularity. And I wish I had the letter in front of me because it's far more powerful. It's a paragraph, and if I had it, I would read it to you. But let me summarize it as crudely as the summary is going to be. They have on numerous occasions shown this film or shared it within a small town or wherever else in one of these countries. And one or a couple people would say, and of course, if the film's called the Jesus Film, the main character in the film is Yeshua. They have met people who said, This must be true because I saw this same person in a dream or in a vision, and he spoke to me and said, this is true. This is the way to have a relationship with God. Now, does Yeshua look exactly like the person who's the character in this film? No, because the character in the film is not Jewish.
It doesn't look.
And certainly doesn't look that way either. But the point is this, is that God constructed the dreams or the visions that these various people got in advance. But remember, that's all occurs at the same point in time for God anyhow, in advance, so that when they saw the film, they would recognize who's in the film as someone who they had seen already. And so they were ready to hear the more complete message. And I have got in my files at least 3, if not 4 or 5 versions of this, renditions of this same story with various different peoples from these various locations. So that is the extent to which God can go and does go in bringing people to himself. Now, that still hasn't answered the second chance business, but it's a related term. So our time has run out, but I will answer the second chance business. And that is it possible that on their deathbed, people in effect have some sort of an experience, visionary or otherwise, with God or with Yeshua, that then convinces them to say, yes, this is what I'm going to expect, or I'm going to accept. And then virtually like that, they're gone and they're, as with the thief, with Yeshua. I have in fact heard of some stories like that from people, third parties who are reliable sources. Now that's not second chance, although it sort of sounds like second chance, but that I'm going to suggest that's a second chance as it gets, because of what we said earlier, that this holding tank, whatever it's called, in people's thought, is not for those who never heard, and then when they hear in that holding tank after death, then they get a chance to respond. That's built on a misconception of the First Peter text and of the Luke text and the First Thessalonians text and the other texts we've gone into. So throw out the holding tank, but understand that our God works in people's lives in such a way that everyone gets more than a fair opportunity. And those who respond to what they know and can know about God will get enough further information to bring them home, so to speak.
Yeah, because remember, if we understand God in his fullness, God knows what might have been along with what was. He knows what offers we have rejected, whatever they are. You decided not to buy life insurance that time. He knows that. He knows what we might have done, and he knows what we never would have done. Correct?
Mhm.
And so because he knows that, I think we really, really have to be careful when we're making blanket statements about who goes into heaven and who doesn't, because I have always maintained we'll be shocked. And remember, never cease to remember. Please always remember the people who came to Yeshua and said, he said, get out of my sight. I'm done with you. They said, but we've done all these things in your name,
Including miracles.
including miracles, including healing, including fill in the blank. I don't know the address of that statement. And what does he say to them? Oh, I overlooked you.
Matthew.
I'm so sorry. No, he says, I never knew you.
I believe it's Matthew 7.
Does that mean our salvation is at risk? No. It means that we need to continually check up on whose name am I really doing stuff. And that's not just false humility. That is to make sure we do not fall into the delusion that these people had with Yeshua in real life, where they said, but we were doing all this for you. And he said, I never knew who you were. So just talking a good game or just doing nice things on the outside, unless you have that relationship with Yeshua, is going to be self-delusional. Did you find it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you found it.
7:22, many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons and perform many miracles? And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Now, as Patrice said, that might be kind of scary, but then he tells you the answer to not be scary. And this is he now moves on to the illustration that's very well known. The person who built their house on the sand and the person who built their house on the rock. And he equates that with hearing these words of mine, and hearing from a Hebrew perspective is not just hearing from the ear, but hearing them, absorbing them, and practicing them. And then he reinforces that and puts them into practice. Is like the wise person who builds on a firm foundation. So that's what Patrice was saying. That's the context of that particular text. So God isn't looking for the splashy or the special effects kind of thing from us. He's looking for this very on the earth.
And if I could get a little more personal about it. So when you read about people prophesying things and oops, they didn't come true. Well, I guess they weren't built on what God wanted them to do, or built on solid rock of scripture, or however you want to phrase it in your own mind. A lot of people have healings. A lot of people do prophecies. Do the people they heal stay healed? Are they even healed? How do you know? Just because somebody says they are doesn't mean they are. I mean, and the splashier they are, the more likely I would be to take a step back and see what happens in the long run. But I do know God was very, very strict about that with the Jewish people. And I wish more non-Jewish people were stricter about their standards for belief than they are currently in this climate.
To repeat the words of Yeshua's brother in James chapter 2, show me your faith. Instead, let me suggest, he says, I'll show you my works. In other words, it's the on-the-ground reality of our lives lived in such a way, and I mentioned this in the Drash last night, that others look at the lives we live and say, wow, that's something I want to be part of. I want to live that kind of a life. That's what is the bottom line.
At the same time, remember, you're going to juggle these two things at the same time. At the same time, people of a certain ilk say, well, now you're just doing good things and hope that God will accept you. No, it's the other way around. You believe, and therefore you're doing these things. You're not doing these things, and therefore you believe.
Yeah, it's what is called, or what I've called in some classes, the pyramid of faith. And I will give credit to whom credit is due. I originally stole it from one of our from our dean of students at the seminary and yeshiva, Rabbi Dr. Michael Schiffman. But it's built on the concept of faith. The word faith in English is the word emunah in Hebrew. But if you translate emunah literally, it means faithfulness. The two can't be separated, they are integrated. And that's what Patrice was saying.
And faithfulness involves outward things that you do
Based on,
your faith.
exactly.
Not to get to faith, not to make sure you get to heaven. You're not building the building blocks so you get to heaven. That would be legalism. But you believe, and therefore on top of that, you're putting things that other people can see. One of the best things when I worked at the University of South Florida, and one of my jobs was to, along with a group, to counsel people who wanted to go be medical doctors after they graduated from college. And so we would have to ask some questions and basically share with them the whole realm of what they would need to present to a medical school if the medical school was going to accept them. And as you know, I don't even know what the statistics are for how many people apply to medical school. I'm not talking about nursing school, I'm talking about to be an MD. I don't know what the percentages that get rejected. And a lot of these have 4.0 averages. But here's one of the things we used to say to them. I thought it was a really handy thing to be able to say. If someone was compiling a court case against you, what evidence could they show to prove that you were a believer and doing things? What evidence have you displayed to prove to others, not yourself or not to God, that you believe what you say you believe, that you're, so we used to say, if you wanted to convince a medical school that you wanted to be a doctor, what are you going to bring to them to show that you want to be? Well, in my heart, I always wanted to be a doctor, and my family always told me I'd be a good doctor. No, what it's asking for is, did you spend time hanging around doctors? Did you spend time volunteering for clinics when they needed help? Things that you could put on your resume to show that you always wanted to be a doctor. And that really speaks more to them than any 4.0 average. It shows them you know what being a doctor will involve. You have a good idea. It's not just, I'll be rich and famous. It's serving people, serving people, serving people is what they would say in a medical school, serving your patients. And I'd say the same thing to believers. If you're going to be arrested, and what evidence are you going to put on your resume to say you follow the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Well, in my heart, I pray my prayers. Outside, it's got to be outside. Sorry, inside's important. It's not important, but outside also important. And too long, the emphasis has been on the inside and denigrating the outside, which is, it's shabby. It's very shabby
And shallow.
and shallow. Well, are those the same? No,
No. Okay.
they're equally not. They're icky. That's my technical term. Icky.
That's a theological construct, by the way. Icky. Let me just say one thing in closing, because I just now looked at
Well,
the
look at
time.
the time. Nice short question, easily answered.
Yeah,
Did I
right.
say that? Oh.
Yeah, and it only occupied 3.5 lines on the page that we printed out. On this whole subject of what do people need to know in order to have a relationship with God? Many years ago, I wrote an article that ended up in the Israeli journal Mishkan. Now, I think that was this century, by the way. The view from here, in some detail, spells out some of the stuff that we've been talking about this evening. So if you're interested in pursuing that, there you go.
How would they get a copy of Mishkan? How could they pursue that?
I bet they could Google it.
Yeah, but then would they be able to get an actual copy of that?
I wouldn't be surprised if, because Mishkan is still around.
Mishkan. That's how you spell Mishkan.
I bet you could get a hold of a PDF of part of that. Worst comes to worst, I do believe that we do have electronic copies of it through menorahministries.com.
Menorah Ministries, all one word. Right?
Yes. And Matt reminds me, yes.
So
So
what's the article called?
the view from here.
That's very vanilla and non-specific, isn't it?
It is.
So it'll be hard for them to remember.
That's right. That's where we'll say it again. The view from here.
In Mishkan, which is an English, a journal in English, but produced in Jerusalem.
Thank you so much for taking that question. I'm sorry it took so long, but
No, no.
I really appreciate the
No.
discussion.
It's a good question. It's an important question.
In a certain way, it's pivotal
Yeah.
on a lot of different topics, because look how many topics we were able to bring
Came
into
out
it.
of it, yeah.
Because when you come right down to it, people who sit in an average church, even though they're believing in their hearts and they have all warm and fuzzy feelings, they really don't know where what they believe comes from. And the pastor or the minister, whoever's speaking, doesn't present it clearly where this comes from. Or they'll show one set of verses, but they don't show the other set of verses over here that will be a confounding variable that should apply to this. So there's a lot of things and there's a whole realm I didn't even bring up.
Right.
That if I started talking about it, John would agree, and the rest of you, we would lose you. You'd be like, oh, I think I have to get a cup of coffee here. Yeah. But no, to us, this is valuable because even John and I learn things from each other, or we put things together. So for us, it helps us make that quilt that everybody makes of their lives. Hopefully there's some patterns in the quilt, but some of us just have crazy quilts. That's crazy quilt is nice sometimes. We like crazy quilts. We can look at all the different patterns in them and it makes no sense whatsoever. And that's the beauty of it. But usually in people's lives, there's a pattern and it's nice if the pattern is beautiful and not just, the worst is when it's blah.
Okay,
Quick
so-
question. I'm not hearing clearly the title of the article, The View from
Here,
H-E-A-R-E.
Yes,
I could say it in many different languages, but that wouldn't
no.
that wouldn't open it up for you.
And it's in a news
It's a journal.
publication,
It's a magazine. journal.
M-I-S-K-A-N.
No.
No, M-I-S-H-K-A-N. The Mishkan in Hebrew was the tabernacle.
Right. I had gotten that, but I missed the H.
Yeah.
Okay.
it
And
is a-
then,
it is a journal.
okay, and you would have put rabbi,
It would have been under my name.
John Fisher.
not rabbi?
Doesn't matter.
Who knows?
Okay.
Fisher. Just look up Fisher. That would be the operative term with a C. F-I-S-C-H-E-R.
Okay. To my notes first, then I'll go into
Okay, and like I said,
looking
you
it
can
up.
do it you can do it that way, or as Matt reminded us, menorahministries.com.
We'll print you out a copy and
Send you an e-file.
send you an e-file. Oh yeah, I forgot that.
Okay, cool. Thank you for your questions. They're always valuable.
Yeah, we didn't even get to this other short question.
I put it
You
back
put it in the folder of to be covered. Yes, and so maybe next time, John and I were talking, perhaps this is just an idea we're floating. We might want to do this in person, although you would still be able to get it online, but we might want to do it at the synagogue. I don't know. Let's see what happens. I think it could be more interactive, which would make it more interesting by definition to us.
And we
And
have a whiteboard.
We had so much fun with these at the retreat. So yeah, I think it would be so nice to
Yeah.
to